Okay, so we are here for our last career panel of Gurukool 2022, the spring session. And we decided to do this on clinical research, what it means, and what different jobs can one apply for, what are the different ways one can go to reach this goal. So we have two people with us today. Asha Bari, thank you so much for joining. She she was in University of Illinois, and then she was at MD Anderson Cancer Center, where I guess she did her PhD. And she's now transitioned in the same place as a clinical research program coordinator. And she is a very recent transition. So she can, kind of tell us very recently, how's everything, how's the job market, how to transition and everything. And then we have Sejuti. Thanks again for joining us. She did her MS and PhD from Tufts University, and then she was a postdoc at Boston Children's Hospital. She then joined Neon Therapeutics as a scientist and is currently at Arbor Biotech, where she joined as a senior scientist and is now a principal scientist. So she can give us a more, how does it feel to be in clinical research for a longer time kind of talk. So welcome both of you, and welcome all the people who could join us today on a Saturday. So so I mean, the first question definitely would be that, what is clinical research, and how do you go about, just the definition of clinical research, what kind of jobs are in it? So anyone, Asha Bari, Sejuti, whoever wants to jump in.
Asha Bari, go for it. I think you're more in the heart of clinical research, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at least at MD Anderson, clinical research is a very large part of what the hospital does. It's very interdisciplinary and has a lot of teams that are working towards the same goal, which is getting research that has been done at the bench fairly recently and taking that through the drug development stage. A lot of times that's done by a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company, and then testing it in patients. So the department that I work in, which is the Investigative Cancer Therapeutics Department, runs exclusively phase 1 and phase 1/2 clinical trials, which are usually the first trials that are done in human patients. So with that, there is obviously a lot of safety, safety is a top priority. So safety in dosing, safety in storage, all of that sort of information is parsed out in these phase 1 clinical trials. And then obviously the second goal is to make sure that once we've identified, at least in phase 1 trials, a dose that's tolerable, seeing, can we escalate that? What's going to be the dose moving forward into larger trials, which would be phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials. So that's, I guess, a very broad definition of it. And I can answer any more questions, but I think Sejuti might have some really interesting perspectives from the industry side, if you'd like to share.
Sure. Yeah, happy to jump in. So thank you for the introduction, Divya. I think I've been out of touch with Gurukool for a little bit now, but I was also in Gurukool actively while I was transitioning to Neon Therapeutics. So the forum has been really helpful. And then I also mentored the year after I started at Neon. So I'll actually follow up from Asha Bari, starting with my experience in the hospital setting. So when I was at Tufts for my PhD research, we actually got, patient tumors from the patient itself. So we waited outside the OT to get the patient tumors, and that, I think, by itself was a pretty gory experience. We dealt with brain tumor patients. Some of them were pediatric patients. So that was hard. Just, from the samples, you would understand the depth of your study. What we used to do from there was, isolate tumor stem cells from there and perform our screening on RNAi screening on which of the kinase inhibitors could stop the growth of those tumor stem cells. And the success of getting the tumor stem cells from those patients actually directly predicted how long the patients would live. Starting from that experience, we also had industrial collaboration with GSK to test out kinase inhibitors. So that, I think, was the start of my interest in clinical research. And then for my postdoc, I worked with patient samples again. There we worked more with cord blood stem cells and in a similar direction to find out, which inhibitors can stop leukemia in pediatric patients again. And so with that aptitude into clinical research, I really wanted to dive into seeing my research then being translated to patients. I think that was one of the barriers that I sort of felt from the academic side. And I know some other labs, clinical labs, are more actively involved in it, but I think I was more in the early discovery side. So with that, I moved into Neon Therapeutics. It's actually now BioNTech. It's been acquired by BioNTech. And what we did there then, it was a clinical stage company already, Neon, before BioNTech acquired it. And there also, I worked primarily with patient tumors. So we would characterize through TCR sequencing, what are the immunogenic T-cell receptors in this patient. And we would, based on the patient tumors, we would come up with a personalized therapy to put together a bunch of peptides to attack that tumor. My group still was more of a product development group. So I did some of the patient research, and then I was involved in the mRNA platform. So, we did not have BioNTech's technology then. So part of my group's job was coming up with mRNA platform instead of a peptide platform. And when I say mRNA platform, mRNA vaccines, and there was a lot of skepticism around it, a lot of engineering runs, and now we know it's working. So after that, I moved into Arbor Biotechnologies. So I was really interested in gene editing, and that's what I'm doing right now. So Arbor Biotechnology, we're still in a preclinical stage. So we do not have drugs in clinical trials, unlike Neon. But I think what I've gotten the opportunity to do here is, when I started, we had a product, a nuclease. So you guys have heard about Cas9, and what our company does is have other alternatives to Cas9, so get other CRISPR nucleases for specific purposes. So when I started, we had one therapeutic nuclease. We showed that it's working in primary cell platform. That paper just came out in Nature Communications, so I can actually talk about it now. So that was really exciting to be involved in a big project where you're partially involved in it. So now we have developed our own internal gene therapy program. We have some partnerships that Arbor actively does with other pharma like Vertex, Lonza. But what I'm doing right now is lead our liver preclinical program. And so I'm getting that chance to develop a nuclease and develop it into a therapeutic program. Our goal is to hit IND end of next year. So going through how the group works. So we start with the nuclease, and then in the preclinical pharmacology group, it goes through a target screening procedure, and then it's passed on to my sub-team. We then validate it. It's called a target validation group. We validate it in primary cells and then pass it on to the in vivo group. I was also involved in vivo groups because, we were so small. I was actually talking to PIs and asking for mouse models, disease models, and then that's how we got licensed and developed a collaboration, and now we're working on that. And now we're going to start our first NHP monkey study. So it's going pretty well, and it's a lot of high pressure, high speed work, but it's really motivating. And I'm happy to talk about what roles are you guys looking at when you're looking in industries. I did not know that my group will be called preclinical pharmacology. When I started, we were called application development. I basically talked to my manager and figured out this is a therapeutic team, that a therapeutic product gets passed on to our team, and then it's our job to take it to the clinic. So I would say, be a little more innovative and inventive in the roles that you're looking for. And happy to follow up more on that later.
Yeah, that was very insightful. So basically, if I understand correctly, you can be a clinical researcher both in the academic, background and also in an industrial background, and with each having its own pros and cons, I guess. And yeah, you get to publish even being in an industry. So I guess that's like a big plus point for a lot of us, who for the last 5-10 years of our life have, kind of looked at our success in terms of papers and publications and citations. I guess that seems pretty promising. So how is clinical research more of a bench work? I think yes, like listening to both of you, but then I also know a lot of people who are in clinical research and who are basically involved with getting people into clinical trials, or because I also know there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of ethical things involved with it, because it's like it's human sample or animal sample. So what are your thoughts on it, and how would you kind of describe the other aspects of clinical research apart from the bench work? So yeah, anyone?
So I think my main goal after my PhD was to never touch a pipette ever again. I loved science and I loved the research, but I really did not like running physical experiments. So the role that I sought is something that I would consider to be science adjacent, which means, so my job is a lot more of the paperwork, the liaising. I work in our department, we have 13 different PIs who all run solid tumor trials. Of all cancer subtypes, basically any solid tumor, you name it, we have it. And so I support 2 PIs, and I started in January, and I think I'm currently managing between 30 to 40 protocols. So that means, and my job basically is I work 100% remote. It's all work from home. There is no labs, there's no samples. And I think a big part of that is working at an institution as large as MD Anderson. You'll get a very big range of experiences depending on the size of the company you work for. So at MD Anderson, we have the regulatory coordinator, which is me. We have who handles things like FDA paperwork. We handle all of the filing, all of the regulatory document maintenance. We liaise with pharmaceutical companies and CROs to make sure that, as updates to the protocol come in, have they been reviewed by our IRB? Have they been reviewed by an external IRB that we're using? Has all that documentation been maintained? And then we let the study team know when maybe like a change in the protocol has been implemented so that that can be done in the clinic. And then within our team, we have, if you're looking, like when you're searching, if you're interested in this type of work, a lot of our study coordinators also come from a research background. So they are much more patient facing. They actually interact with the patient. They help schedule the patient. They help walk the patient through the clinical trial and say, like, this is kind of what you're going to go through. This is the timeline. We also have data coordinators, because with an institution this large and this amount of data that comes in, somebody needs to collate all of that data and make sure that it's interpretable and manageable, and we can pull from it as needed. And of course, beyond that, we have a huge team in our investigational pharmacy. We have a huge team in our CTR, in our laboratory setting that does the blood draws, does the sample prep, sample processing. So I know that at smaller institutions or industries that have maybe smaller teams, you may take on more of those roles. You may be a reg coordinator and a study coordinator and a data coordinator. So just depending on where you go, you will see a lot of different aspects of the process. I would say one thing that's a little bit unique about MD Anderson is that the reg is not siloed, but definitely we have so many studies that we definitely have enough on our plate without doing the additional work of the patient-facing information dissemination. So that is my, I wanted to get away from the bench. I specifically sought roles that were away from the bench, and I think depending on the team, some reg coordinators, you may be on a paper or a publication, depending on your contribution, but I don't think I will be from this position at least. And I think another thing is a lot of times, I think probably different to Sujiti's role is the extent of my use of my research knowledge. So I did very basic research. So you had a lot more experience actually with clinical research or even translational research. I worked on a very specific ROGF that targeted 2 Rho GTPases in the context of breast cancer cell motility. So the transition from like nanoscopic view of science to this like 10,000-foot level of clinical trials was a very big jump, but it was something that I specifically sought out because you're not in like the daily, like, oh, I need to like figure out this paper. But instead, what is the advantage when you have a research background coming into this role is a lot of times you have to push your protocol to your department chair or to somebody else, and being able to skim a protocol and say, okay, this is the background research. This is the part that's like, this is what was done in animals. This is really cool. This is what we're going to highlight. When you're kind of packaging it for reg documents or for your PI to present somewhere else, it's very helpful. And it's super cool because you're like, oh, I remember when that paper came out like 5 years ago and now it's in trials. Like, how exciting. You know, the undruggable targets are finally having like 2nd generation small molecule inhibitors in clinic, which is amazing. But definitely, I would say if you're looking for something that will give you papers, publications, and kind of keep a foot in that academic door, be mindful and ask those questions when you're interviewing, the extent to which the place that you're working for publishes, what's the like process for who they put on papers, what types of contributions, you know, make somebody an author, and will you have these, is that contribution within the scope of your role? Things like that are good things to look for.
Yeah, Sharbari, I think very, very good breadth of experience there that you're having. So that's exciting. For publications, I just wanted to clarify, you know, your situation in a small company changes every day. When I started in my company 2 years ago, we were not allowed to publish. We were not allowed to talk about what we're researching. We were really in a more stealth mode. And as we are growing, we're now going out to conferences, publishing. So your role might change, and be prepared for that if you're looking for smaller companies. I'll also like start with the bigger company role. I think what Ashabari talked about, you know, going and talking to patients and talking about your drug product, the MSL role is something that I looked at when I was in my PhD. So that's a medical science liaison. I was actually scared to leave the bench, which is why I did not look further in it. But I think that's a very exciting prospect, and you can get into a MSL role right after your PhD. So I think that's, if you know that's what you want to do it, I think that's a very good option. The way smaller companies tackle it, I can talk more about that. So Neon was 100 people big, and then it grew to 200 when I started. And the way we tackle clinical trials, we had a ClinOps group, a clinical operations group, which would do most of the work that Ashabari just went over. So that was, there was a separate data coordinator, and then there's a clinical trial manager. And for a lot of those roles, you do need an MD, but for some you do not. You can also do a master's or a clinical data management course, and that helps quite a bit. I'm just trying to look up, I have a friend who did a master's in BU in clinical investigation, and she's now the director of ClinOps in Moderna. So I think there are little certificates and courses that you can do which can help you get to where you want, if you know the path. For me, I think what I wanted was that was being in touch with science as well. So I do maybe 20% lab work now. I have a team, so it's easier for me to do other things as well in addition to doing science. But when you're starting out as a scientist, it is hard to carve out the time to be able to do other things. I think it worked out in my favor that I volunteered to do projects which were involved with patient samples. So I was involved in writing up, CTA reports. We were in CTA is the EU equivalent of FDA, and that experience again was really helpful. We worked with the QC group. At Arbor right now, like I mentioned, we're a preclinical company. So we actually do not have a regulatory group. We consulted with a regulatory consultant based in EU again. And then I was sitting in meetings with MHRA regulatory board. So it was great to get that exposure with the MHRA, which is the FDA equivalent of EU. And work on those reports. So we got an early IND, and then the next step will be preparing reports for pre-IND reports. And I'll be responsible for the target validation part of it. So there is a lot of data packaging and big picture science questions involved. I think another role which also does that is a project manager or a program manager, depending on how your company does it. So those are also pretty interesting roles to look at, and something I'm also personally interested in.
Okay, that sounds exciting. Like that's a huge breadth, like, on the bench, outside the bench, and in both the roles having so much of diversity, I guess. Yeah, that's a lot. For both of you, like what other like options ahead? Like for Ashabari, she's just starting up, but then where do you guys see yourself in like 5 years or maybe 7 years of your career? Like what's the general trajectory of a person who's in clinical research? Like if you could just throw some light on that.
So I know that a lot of people who start in reg actually do transition to a medical science liaison role, because it kind of is that happy medium between getting to use your research and science background and still getting to be very involved in the clinical research, but you also get a little bit more of a bump in pay and also in just responsibility and the type of work. For me, I'm not sure exactly what I want to do in the next 5 years, because I think one of the things I'm realizing is I didn't know very much about, like, I knew a little bit about the entry level roles that I could get in industry or like industry adjacent, because Anderson is still sort of academia. But I didn't know it was like after that. So what do people do next? And really, the world is kind of your oyster, because you come out with an advanced degree in science, and if you get your foot in the door, that's to whatever industry you want. So I have friends that have gone on from reg positions into like regulatory in industry, like at a bigger pharmaceutical company. I have people that have gone into reg for device development, friends that have gone in for the MSL, people that have gone in for clinical trial project management. Again, one of those, instead of like managing 30 protocols tangentially, you're looking at kind of the next step up in a more responsibility, more experience, more expertise, and more sway with where you want to kind of take your trials. Medical directors, you usually do need an MD to be a medical director, but you can be like a director of clinical operations somewhere. So all of those things are, I personally don't know what I want to do next. I'm still kind of figuring that out. I finished my PhD in November, so I feel like I'm still kind of recovering. But there's definitely a lot of options. And one thing I will mention that I think everybody says, like, oh, the way to do it is networking. And it's 100% true, because I lined this job up so that I could defend. And a big part of that was I had two friends that were working in the department at the time. So they knew my kind of PhD track record. They knew where I wanted to be. So when I applied, I had like 3 people bring the manager my resume at the same time. So, and I think more recently I sat in at like a career panel, and networking was huge. And I think a lot of times people don't realize how large their network already is. So definitely leverage your undergrad, your PhD, your postdoc. Those institutions all have groups on LinkedIn, alumni groups, and you can see where people work. And I think people are very receptive to trainees reaching out and being like, hey, like I'm looking for my next step. I see that you're in this role. Can I set up 20-minute informational interview? And kind of like wedge your foot in the door. Like no one's going to open the door for you. You really got to like kick it down a little bit. But that is a huge advantage to even finding out what types of roles are out there. Because once you start talking to one person that's maybe in the industry you want to be in, you're not very interested in their role, but they start talking to you about their team and what the team does and what their background is, all of a sudden you have like 7 more things you can search when you're looking for jobs. Or other people that you can reach out to and be like, hey, I talked to your coworker. I think I'm a little bit more, like my interests are a little bit more aligned with what you do, or my background is more aligned with what you do. Like, can you talk to me about your path? So that's a huge kind of good way to figure out what you want to do next. As for me, I'll let you know.
That's fair.
Yeah, very good points actually, just about networking. So I landed my current job through networking at my previous job. I was talking to my colleague about, how I really enjoyed more of the gene molecular biology part than the immunotherapy part. And he was like, oh, my wife heads a preclinical group in Arbor. So that's how this job happened, and it was not even called a preclinical pharmacology group at that point. Like I said, we were called application development. So I mean, I wouldn't even think of applying for that role if it did not happen through my network. And just to give you an overview of what I'm looking at in the next 5 years, I don't really know. But like Asha Bari said, I am on the phone with my friends who are working in different related roles. I think a couple of weeks back, I just got in touch with my AWIS. I did a lot of Association for Women in Science, and I was involved with the mentoring network there. So I got in touch with the older mentee, co-mentee. So we were in the same mentee network, and she's now a program manager at another gene editing company. So I was like, hey, what's your role like? I always wonder, how is it from the R&D side versus the operations side, which in some companies involves clinical operations, in some companies that is a lot of strategy, and also program management. So my 5-year goal is to, take a program to IND, a clinical program, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. And then where that will then take me, I see you can either, climb up the rungs of R&D, and some people find satisfaction that way. And I've seen examples where people have got frustrated on the program management side and vice versa. So that's why I can't really make up my mind. It depends on the company that you're looking at and the role that you're looking at, and the role also can evolve over time. So keep talking to people. Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say one other thing with reaching out to your friends. If you're part of any professional network, like AWIS, or if you are interested in a position that has a society, like there is a society for clinical regulation program coordination, there's a society for medical writing in the industry. And all of those societies have LinkedIn pages and websites that include their social media managers information, that include their directors information. Reach out to those people, because I mean, everyone is thrilled when an organization that they're a part of is getting attention and is bringing in talent, so use your friends, use your friends' friends, use your friends' friends' friends, anybody that you can find Like, don't be disingenuous, don't ask for a job or anything. But if you repeatedly ask a couple of people in the same industry, all of a sudden, if they're friends outside of work and they're like, yeah, I keep getting like LinkedIn messages from this person, they seem really interested. Oh, I do too. Like, now you have your name and your interest in multiple people's heads. So use your friends.
Okay, yeah, that's a point well taken, I guess. I think Asha Bari mentioned about a particular certification. So if you guys could just, throw some light, because, for people doing basic research, like most PhD or postdocs would do. So how do you actually, kind of get into clinical research? Like, what are the things you can like keep working on as a postdoc if you know like your goal in another 2 years, is to be a clinical researcher? So how can you basically prepare yourself for it, even though your science is basic research? So like, what are your thoughts on it?
So I was really lucky because I was technically at UT Health. So I went to an umbrella program for grad school that encompassed UT Health Labs as well as MD Anderson. And we had access to MD Anderson courses. So I actually took a course in clinical trials management, which was extremely helpful. And more than being helpful, it was building my network, because as soon as I finished that class, I emailed every single one of the professors and was like, hey, I'm really interested. Please keep my name in mind. I'm going to be graduating around this time. And I would like follow up with them all the time. Not like every day, but every couple of weeks, be like a little update. Like, oh, I saw this position is open. Is this going to be working with you? Blah, blah, blah. So in that course, obviously you may have a course similar to that at your institution, or at like a sister institution. I'm not 100% sure how many places have courses like that, but the certificates that I listed in the chat are free, and they're great to put on your CV if you're interested in transitioning into clinical trial management or clinical trial in general, because it shows that you have an understanding of the gravity of, like you're working with human patient data, the ethics that are involved, how are these projects reviewed, like all of those are taken very, very seriously. Just like in research where ethics are important, like it's like a whole new level here, like totally documented every little thing, everything is above board. There's no like, oh, I got these cells from my like friend in the lab next door without an MTA. No. So that's a really good way to do it. A second way, if you're really interested, is looking into the Society for Clinical Trial Management, which is called SOCRA, SOCRA. They have chapters around the country. They run continuing education meetings for people who are CCRP certified. So if you can find your SOCRA chapter head in your location and say, hi, I'm really interested. What can I do through your society that, can help me kind of get my face out there? And just generally taking an interest in kind of the introduction and the fundamentals to clinical research. It goes a long way, because like I had zero clinical knowledge coming in. Like Western blots, PCR, great. Anything to do with patient data, I had never even handled like a large data set. So I really relied heavily on having those certificates, having that class, and using my network to kind of be like, I'm very interested in this. Look, like I've done this to like show that I'm interested, that I can learn quickly. How can I get in? That would be my advice, is pad your CV with things that show your interest. And also, I know this is kind of painful to hear, but at least if you're going for a position that is more science adjacent, they don't care about your publications. I came out of grad school with like one publication, and it wasn't even for my grad school project. So don't ever sell yourself short and be like, oh, I don't have the experience, or I don't have no, go into it with 100% confidence. Like, you'll be fine. The worst I can do is say no.
Yes, I think what I would also just add on to the courses, I think, so what I went for is a very similar course in Tufts also. Tufts had a clinical CTSI, we called it. I guess it's Clinical and Translational Science Graduate Program. And also, you know, I did my master's in biomedical engineering. We had a lot of guest speakers there, and they were from the industry or they were from different areas of the industry. Some of them were from regulatory department, and I kept in touch with them as well. The other thing that I would say look out for is, you know, the field that you're working in. For example, I was in American Cancer Society. Conferences also have workshops. I went and took a course in Jackson Labs and actually got a credit for it for like a 1 week. I could substitute a PhD course for that 1 week course credit. So look for courses outside your university as well in the fields that you're interested in, and you know, people will most likely be receptive. There is internship opportunities as well within the university. Within Tufts, we definitely had it, and you know, there might be in wherever you are based off of, there might be internship opportunities available around there. In the biotech field, I know that, you know, some biotechs offer internship opportunities, and we're always looking out for co-op students mostly. And that, I think, is a great experience. Northeastern has a co-op program, which I think we value quite a bit. And yeah, I think for transitioning for academia, I would stress on those things. And the other option that some of my friends have also taken is, you know, join the role that's easiest for you, get into R&D as a scientist, and then you can always move directions from there into regulatory affairs. It's very closely linked with R&D.
Okay, that's insightful. So I was just wondering, like, these internships or these trainings or these courses, can one do along with their PhD or postdoc, or do you like kind of, you know, you cannot do it together? How does that work?
I did it with my PhD. Sorry, yeah, okay. Go ahead, Ashwari.
I was just going to say the same thing. I did it during the two that I put in the chat. The GE has a sales internship that you can do during, it's like 10 hours a week. The J&J fellowship is like a next step career. It's like full time, but it's like a rotational program that you can do. But yeah, all of my stuff I did during, which is, it's like you have to be comfortable like drawing that boundary with your PI. That's like, I am going to do something for my career development because this is a training role. Because I think a lot of times PIs are like, you are mine and all your time is mine and you will work for only me. And you have to be pretty firm and being like I mean, some are nicer than others about it. Mine was very like, no, you're not going to shirk any duties here. And I was like, I am, because there's 24 hours in a day and I'm going to do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, you know, talk to your committee. I think that's a great resource in addition to your PI, to put in personal development goals there, I think. Yeah.
That's a fair point. And I guess
if any of you are based in Houston, are any of you based in Houston? Maybe not. If you ever find yourself in Houston, we have a group called Inventure, which is a trainee-run consulting group, which does projects with, like, I did like a stint there. They're paid on the side, which is awesome. I did a stint in like market research, and I did something for Johnson & Johnson's device development research. So like, if you've got any consulting groups, even if you're not super interested in consulting, because I really wasn't, they work with huge companies a lot of times, where they bring in speakers from large companies. Like, utilize those. But yeah, you have to do it you have to be firm and be like, I'm doing this for my training.
Okay, yeah, that sounds fair. And like, I guess many of these certifications might also be virtual now. So yeah.
The HHS ones are all virtual. It's like a quiz. You can find a study guide online and you read it and you just take a quiz. And you can take them multiple times as well if you're struggling.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like something which most of us can kind of start off with and then, you know, go off from there. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about skill set certifications, we talked about options ahead, and we talked about academic and industry. Now, is there any other facet of clinical research that you guys would like to, kind of focus on? Or if not, then we can just move into like, when you're ready now to apply for a job, so what kind of jobs do you look in? I mean, I know LinkedIn is kind of, a start to, kind of start looking for your search, but then do you guys have, any suggestions on people who don't really know, people who know who want to be in clinical research but don't really, know a lot about companies, or do not have many people in their network to kind of mentor them? So what are your suggestions? Like, how should they go about looking for a job? And like, your experience with job interviews, like anything that you can basically tell us about jobs and how to go about searching for them.
Yeah, I can tell you that we're interviewing maybe like, I'm in 2 interview panels every week. So yes, we are actively interviewing. But there are so many biotech companies out there that it is really hard to identify where do you want to go. I totally get that when you're transitioning. So other than utilizing your network, I think another good tool, how we find a lot of our candidates, is also through recruiters. So we have a full-time HR, but our recruiter is mostly consultant. So they're also good resources to talk to and get a sense of the role. Some of them really understand what people are looking for. Company recruiters are also really helpful. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there.
One thing that I think really helped me, you should probably, I feel like most institutions have like a career development type officer or office in general, doing practice interviews, because it's really easy to sit there and like type out your answers or kind of like walk through them in your head. But when somebody asks you it and you're like, look, I did all my interviews online, COVID, so getting the cadence of like making sure that your answer sounds well thought out, but not like you're reading it from a script, is really important. I did 2 or 3 sets of like mock interviews with our career development officer, and she gave me some questions ahead of time and some questions to kind of think about, which is immensely helpful.
Are there like any patterns for these job interviews? Like for consulting, we know like they give you case practices and stuff, but for these jobs,
I gotta ask kind of your first round like you have to think about the fact that unless your resume is already with a hiring manager or a program manager and then they take it to HR, your first introduction to that company that you're like blind applying to is somebody with no science background. So pulling keywords, skills, and phrases from the job description and working that into your experience and highlighting how your experience shows expertise in XYZ, tailoring your resume to each job, very important. And your first interview is going to be with somebody from HR who's going to ask you like the same old question that's like, have you ever dealt with conflict in your life as a person in science for 10 years? Like, yes, of course, obviously. But you have to be diplomatic in the way you answer it. You can't be like, oh yeah, my person that I was collaborating with was a total piece of garbage and left me off my paper. And you have to think about like not only how you handle the situation, but how that can be useful to the role that you're going into. So even if you just Google like basic HR interview questions, your answers are going to be very different coming from somebody that's in a research background, and tailoring those responses to, because a lot of times you're not applying to just one kind of job, right? Like I was applying to medical writing, I was applying to like grad student affairs. I was applying to all of these different types of roles. So like the same question can be answered in many different ways to highlight your expertise. So think that through. You can even practice with a friend. Just be like, can you ask me this question? But those types of things when you're like blind applying are important. And to be fully honest with you, in the last 3 years, that I've been thinking about applying to jobs and talking to people who have gotten jobs recently, I do not know a single person who got a job just from sending in an application and hoping for the best. You need to do the legwork to utilize that network. And if you don't have a network in the area you want to go in, build it while you're still in training. Because being a trainee, being a postdoc, being a PhD, it puts you in this wonderful position where people are just dying to give back. People have been in your shoes. People know how hard it is to get that first foot in the door. And not everybody will respond to you, but if you have a nice message, a professional message, a courteous message, especially early career people are very likely to turn around and like pull you in wherever they can. So I would say, yes, your application materials are extremely important. They should be well thought out, well reviewed, and your interview skills, you should keep them in good condition and practice. But it's really going to be your network that gives you the job. No one's going to, like an HR manager who has no science background is not going to look at your resume and page through to the bottom of publications and be like, oh, they have a PNAS paper, this in this, like, they're not going to do that. Don't bank on that.
Yeah, I think very, very right advice is there again. The only thing I would add is, as hiring managers, we do an initial phone screen. And usually I can tell within like the first 10 minutes if this is going to be a fit for the role or not. So some of the advice is there, I think, to handle the questions, say don't know when you don't know about it. Admit it, and then think about the reasons and come up with an intelligent question. Part of what we do want to get at is get you to drive to that wall where you can where we can see how you think on the spot. So that I think is part of PhD training in general, part maybe like part of your qualifiers, your thesis defense. So having that well-rounded scientific opinion matters, and your personality, I think, matters a lot for the interview. People are looking for the kind of people they want to spend most of their day with when they're working. So.
Okay, I guess, yes, all those points are, I guess, very important. So yes, I would like to thank you all. And I don't know if there are any questions from people who are here, like Anil, Piyush, Parijat, Nupur, Rukmani, or Connie. If you guys have any questions, we can take them, or yeah.
Bye, Parijat.
Okay. Okay, so I guess like, okay, so I guess maybe we covered like everything. So yeah, thank you so much. That was really very insightful. And yeah, I will look forward to connecting to both of you. And I guess like other people, if you would like to connect with them on LinkedIn, that's like a professional way to do, and like maybe a way to kind of start building your network like they mentioned. So please do that. And once again, thank you so much for all your time and on a Saturday morning. So yeah, thank you so much.